Hello and welcome to Art Show. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Heather Ujjie. Hi, Heather. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. So thankful to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you on the show, and I want to start out for those people who are unfamiliar with your works. I wanted to show them a selection of pieces. So obviously, I went on your website, just chose a few pieces at random, and well, not at random, pieces that I thought were interesting. And there was such a selection to choose from. It was, I had a tough time finding pieces. But this particular piece, I was really attached to. And I think it might be the color. Can you tell me a little bit about this piece?
Oh, well, it was a lot of my work is inspired by global mythologies and a lot of historic research that I do. And this was inspired by a 17th century Indian manuscript painting. And the elephant and the demon, I kind of recontextualized into this kind of narrative landscape. And the color, I would say, is more my own inner voice. I mean, some of the figurative elements are inspired by um, that culture, but I would say the like the background color, the kind of swirling circles, and this universe that I've depicted. That's all just very intuitive, and that just came out during my process.
Well, we're going to talk about color in a little bit, but my question to you is, the first thing I was drawn to, of course, was the color, but it was really I love the shift of the dark orange to the light orange, how it the background where it goes up, and then my eyes started to get into the patterning there. I was curious about that background pattern. What is that? What am I looking at?
So my work is a combination of analog and digital tools, meaning that I hand paint and draw. I scan a lot of my images in, and then I rework them in Photoshop or Illustrator. And so what you're looking at is an original painting I did on a 20 by 30 sheet of paper of this kind of black silhouetted linear pattern. And then I brought it into Photoshop, manipulated it, and scaled it up and brought it in as a layer. And so then I kind of created this silhouette of the kind of screen that goes through the entire piece. And I have a background in textile design, a printmaker as for home furnishing and fashion. So a lot of my work integrates patterning, whether it be in repeat or just as part of the abstract part of the work.
Yeah, I can definitely see the printmaking background in that. The idea that you work in all these layers is it really just makes the works delicious to me. Here's another piece that I couldn't pass up, and what I liked about not only this piece, but I had the fortunate chance to see your work in person, was the fact that I could stand here and look at it, and the longer I looked, the more of these hidden elements started to pop out. And that, to me, that's a great sign of an artist who's really having a conversation with a viewer. What drew me in was these vein-like structures, the blue and the red structures. Uh, so it's in multiple uh, places in this. Where does that come from?
So, yeah, I thank you so much. I think you're referring to the veins and the trees when you say
Mm-hmm.
like, okay. So, again, I'm always researching and looking at global culture. The landscape behind the foreground figure that was inspired by art from the Joseon Korean period. There was some there was a show at the PMA a couple of years ago that I went to see. And I love a lot of Japanese and Korean and Chinese historic, prints and landscape painting, India ink, explorations, all that stuff. So that was also inspired by a painting I did, and that original work was painted with gouache. Most of my painted work is gouache, and that was on a 30 by 40 sheet of watercolor paper. and then I imported it into Photoshop and manipulated it as a layer. And one thing that's really wonderful about working digitally, although I really love painting, is that when you start to work between the layers, you can, like play with transparency.
Hmm.
You can kind of really experiment with different effects digitally. But the challenge is always, how do I make my work challenging and interesting to the viewer without becoming too digital? Because I think something gets lost in that realm a little bit. And, you mentioned bringing the viewer in. That's funny you say that, because my father was an amazing artist, painter, and he used to always say that if there's a little bit of mystery in the work, that's how you seduce your viewer, right? And then when you notice something, and then you come in for a closer look. And so I wanted these gradients in the landscapes that you mentioned with color, and this kind of hint of these linear elements in the branches of the trees, which are red. And then in the foreground, there are the veins that are referring to human anatomy. And so I kind of wanted to have a dialogue between nature and humanity. And this piece is all about the mass extinction of the animal species. And so it's kind of like a cautionary tale. All the animals are taking their revenge. And if you look closely, you'll see the squirrels are nibbling on a cadaver, a hand, which is actually based, the painting I did of that was based on an anatomical rendering from the 19th century.
Hmm.
And then there's like human body parts in the foreground with all these veins hanging down, and dead birds, and volatile spiders. So I was,
Perfect.
yeah, so I guess I wanted to seduce the viewer, that I'm always interested in that. And you look at something from a distance because the scale is big and you're intrigued.
Yeah.
But then as you come closer, you see a lot of detail. And I'm able to do that with the layering techniques. The water, the patterning in the water was part of that original painting. And I wanted this to be a landscape of sorts. So
Hmm.
I put that in the background.
It,
But I
it,
think, sorry,
sorry.
once I start talking, you can't stop me.
I'll just go over you. You're fine. Well, you said something talking about the mystery in the work, and I always feel that I'm onto something when I'm looking at someone's work, and when I walk away, I've got more questions than I had when I first walked up and see the work. And the other thing I would like to encourage viewers to do is to actually seek out your work in person, because I can tell you, as somebody who's done that, there's a vastly different experience seeing your work in person, because it does have that. When you first see it, it does look flat on the screen, but when you see it in life, it has that handmade mark that just makes them so delicious. There's something about a handmade mark, a wobbly line, or something like that, that lends something new to your work. This piece, of course, when I saw this, which I saw this years ago, Dürer comes into mind, but then there's this surrealist pop to it. So what exactly? I don't know if you can tell me about your train of thinking when you were making this.
Um, yeah, I would say the common thread the last 10 years through my work is I'm really intrigued with the otherworldly. And for me, that is all about kind of creating a dialogue between nature and the human race,
Hmm?
and our relationship and all of the conflicts and sacred things that come out of that. And um, I've always loved drawing the human body, and in recent years, I've been really looking at a lot more South Asian art, but this piece is like, I don't know, 7 to 10 years old, something like that. And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
was looking at a lot of Renaissance art at that time, more Western European culture. And I just loved her. I always have. Amazing technician, artist, visionary. And you know, the process of doing an ink wash, doing the cross hatching, kind of getting in there and really rendering this so that it kind of alludes to this whole history of printmaking and Renaissance art. And I love the theme, of course, Adam and Eve,
Mm.
and just trying to find a way to take something historical and give it a twist and make it more contemporary and surreal. And yeah, I liked, it's funny you're showing this piece because recently I've been doing a lot of fiber art installation and larger works, and I really miss painting and drawing.
Mhm.
I really want to get back to the handwork and find a way to experiment further with that.
Well, I love the fiber work. You know, your current show that you have over at Moore is really great. But this has one thing that work I don't really see it. I love the humor that sort of peeks out in this. You know, it's not very often I can come across work that actually has, you know, depth to it and humor, or at least lightheartedness. And so that's, you know, it's why I was really attracted to this piece, aside from the fact that I love the Adam and Eve theme myself. Um, so
Thank
here we are. This is a few years later, I believe. What is this? What am I looking at? This is a
So
detail, right?
yeah, so this I was looking at a lot of Hiroshige and Hokusai and Japanese prints. And this was designed as a wallpaper.
Mm-hmm.
I love shunga as well, a lot of Japanese erotic art. And we're looking at the 5 points of the repeat structure, but this is
Mm-hmm.
actually a
Okay.
wallpaper. So it's a pattern and repeat that I installed at the Art Alliance show a couple years back. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, all the work that you see that is 2D work is all originally hand painted. So this geisha figure was hand painted with gouache. The little figures that are dancing around her were painted with gouache. This piece, I would say, really speaks to my background in more commercial textile print design, because some of the ways I rendered the flowers are kind of indicative of 19th century floral bouquets and the kind of scroll work that is around the flowers. You see that a lot in a lot of the like shabby chic and floral patterns from like 19th century onward. So yeah, it was really a pattern and repeat. But again, this seduction element, I would say, is another common thread in my work. There is a overt and latent eroticism in my work that um, I try to speak about in a way that's not offensive, in a way that is subtle enough that you want to see more, but it's not too
Mm-hmm.
controversial.
Yeah. No, no, not nowadays. This is quite a
Well,
lovely thing.
surprise.
I'm curious, did you produce just enough of this for the exhibit that it was for, or is this something that, you know, can people buy this wallpaper now?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the beauty of working digitally. I'm not a screen printer like traditional fabric workshop, make the screens, have long tables.
Right,
That's not how I work. I
right.
actually design, I hand paint, I import the digital motifs into Photoshop or Illustrator. I make patterns in repeat that could be translated as yardage in any substrate, from wallpaper to fabric to
Mm-hmm.
like clear, transparent materials. So once I design it and it's in a real repeat, I can outsource it and digitally print it on any substrate in any size. So
Nice.
yes, this is still for sale. If anyone's,
I need a room of this. That's why.
oh, I would love that.
And then finally, this I actually saw this piece in real life when you had it hanging up, and it's just a gorgeous monster of a work. I mean, there's no other way to see it, because it really, I just had a conversation with another artist earlier this morning, and we both agreed that one of the things we love to do is to make the most interesting thing in the room. And so if this, no matter what else you put in a room, this beats it, right? That's really, and it's not just the size, it's also the complexity of the color palette and the storyline that's within this. I really don't have a question for this piece. I just really wanted people to show it. You still own this piece?
Yeah, one advantage of working on fabric is I can scale things up, and then when the work is finished, I can roll it in a long roll. So like if I was a traditional painter and these were individual canvases, I'd have a huge storage issue
Yeah, right.
because these would be really large,
So,
like 15 feet long pieces. So um, yeah, and this piece really, thank you so much for showing this piece because this piece really came out of the pandemic.
yeah.
It has 15 different hand painted works integrated into it. It's all about, it's called COVID in the War and Peace in the Time of COVID.
Mhm.
And throughout the work, there are all these COVID flowers that are blossoming. And then all the iconography is from kind of like global culture, kind of representing a rift between violence and love and health and all these different elements. But again, this idea of using layers and gradients of color. And for me, as being both an artist and a designer, I love to design a site-specific work, and this was designed for this gallery space. I was so thankful that it was shown at Moore because I had that huge
Yeah.
entrance way. But
Hmm.
one frustration I've had is I haven't really broken out into the commercial market and public art. And I see this piece as a piece that would be installed in a hotel in a lobby.
Oh, I definitely think so too. In fact, my next question was actually, since this is a digital file, do you just one off these, or could you say do an edition of 3 or something like that?
So yes, so that's where my identity as a printmaker is more traditional, right? The traditional printmaker
Hmm.
do editions, right?
Right.
So digitally, it's kind of a gray area in the art world of, printing your work digitally. Is it really authentic and all the rest of it? But yeah, so this could be scaled up or scaled down, and I don't have a problem with that as a designer. When I worked as a print designer in the industry, it's all about the client, right? What does the
Hmm.
client need?
Right.
And in fact, I just had, if you went to my last show at Jog, remember that tree of life that was
Hmm.
against the windows?
Hmm.
Well, there was an auction at the National Liberty Museum, and I actually sold that piece.
Good.
It's huge, right? It's like, oh
Yeah.
my God,
Yeah.
where's it gonna fit? But I have to have a conversation with Megan because somebody bought it and exactly what you just said. They asked if I could reprint it smaller scale to fit their home. So I
Hmm.
have to figure out how to do that. But if you work digitally, it's very easy to do that.
Yeah. I love that the possibility. I'm a printmaker myself, so I
Oh,
understand
yeah.
the connections there. So I wanted to start our the other part of our conversation, where I often start. I want to know about your beginnings. And in particular, I want to go way back. Do you have any sort of memories as a child of, say, a first exposure to art, something that bowled you over, something that you still remember?
Oh my God, yes. Well, I'm sure you realize this if you read a little bit about me and so forth, but I grew up in a family of artists, and my dad was part of the abstract expressionist movement, and he used to hang out with all the bad boys, Pollock, de Kooning, and he studied with Hans Hofmann back in the day, and I grew up in a loft in Greenwich Village. So like for me, that question is a little odd because from day one, my life growing up was all about art making. My mom had a studio in our loft in the village. My dad had an outside studio. Um, Everything we did in our childhood, in fact, there was always an ongoing argument in my home. My mother would give us coloring books, and my father was totally against it because why are you painting inside the lines? That's not being creative, right? And we
That's the
used,
best thing I heard all day.
yeah, yeah. So, and also my parents were both real characters. you know, they had really strong personas, and as both being painters and artists, my mom was a painter as well. They met in the East Village in the 50s in New York. So like dinner at our house was lots of arguments, lots of
Hmm.
intellectual dialogue. And to me, being an artist is all about questioning the world and how you interpret the world around you. And I was always taught not only to be creative artistically, painting, drawing, building, creating, but also mentally, like, you know, inquire, like have an inquiring mind, like why is something that way? What's happening in the world? Who are you? Like those kinds of questions. As a young adult, I actually had a really hard time adjusting to the world because I was so atypical. I thought everybody grew up like that, you know?
Uh-huh.
And they had a house in Maine, and we used to sublet the loft every summer. So this feeling of, you know, how important nature is and all of that, that was really, I just have always really appreciated being close to nature and looking at the natural world.
When I first came across your work, the very first thing I thought of was to think of nature. And then, you know, after a couple of minutes really diving into the work, I realized not nature, but human nature, you know, and there is a difference there. Am I on the mark with that or?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think part of my struggles as a young adult and to this day is this question of morality, of what is right, what's wrong, what's good, what's evil. And you know, we live in such a complex world right now, with the war in Ukraine, what's going on in Israel, what's going on in the United States, global warming. It's just it can be overwhelming, right? There's
Yeah.
so much going on, but I find it fascinating, like human nature, to explore who we are, what's our relationship to the world and each other, and what is considered good and evil. And so there's all these gray areas around that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so in a lot of my 2D works, I think the narrative is kind of trying to get the viewer to question, like the pieces I did for Rowan University, those were all inspired by Bosch, The Garden of Earthly Delights.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just looking at that piece as like, you know, morality tale of heaven and hell, and
Right.
you know, and so yeah, all of that. I guess that's part of who I am. I struggle with that. I
Yeah.
struggle.
Well, I'm
I
curious about, you know, the narrative in your work is paramount. But I was wondering, was it always that way?
It was what? I'm sorry.
Paramount, like the narrative. Was it?
Um, well, yeah, I'm actually a really late bloomer when it comes to the fine art world. Although I grew up in an artistic family, before I moved from New York City to Philadelphia, I was a designer. And so I was designing prints. I was also a costume designer, working with avant-garde theater and dance. So I didn't go the classic route of getting an MFA. And even though it was like I grew up getting an MFA because my parents were like, my father, if I showed him a sketch, he'd be like, well, let's change the line quality
Right.
here.
Yeah.
You know, like it was like, so I didn't go that route because I grew up getting all that critical dialogue.
Yeah.
And when as a young adult, I was working in the design world, and then switching to fine art, it was a gradual evolution. And I'd say I'm young in that way because I feel like it's only been the last 10 years that I
Yeah. Yeah. I
switched from the design world to the art world. And
mean,
now I'm bring
that
it
doesn't
all.
seem like a long time, but at the same time, I think like Van Gogh only painted for like 10 years, right? So you got to think
Oh,
about it
that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
in
Yeah.
perspective. Yeah, it wasn't a long time. So I've got time just for two questions, and I had to get these two questions in. The first one is, let's talk about color. Tell me what you think about color.
Oh,
That's
there,
huge, I know.
there's so many things you could say about it. You know, I started teaching a color theory course at Moore. I love teaching, and color is something that is so fascinating. It really crosses boundaries between science, technology, and art making. there's a science of color. There's color that, affects your mood and how you feel. There's, a history of, vision is all about color. But I know we don't have much time, but I guess I would just say, for me as an artist, I think you're born with certain things. One thing I noticed through teaching is you can teach your students color theory, right? You can teach them complementary color, saturation, chroma, all that stuff. But ultimately, when they do their art, it comes from an intuitive place. And the way they express color, you can't teach them that. I mean, you can teach them the formal part of it. And I think maybe my childhood, the way I grew up, I was encouraged to be very expressive. I feel like color just came to me
Hmm.
really naturally. And if you look at some of my father's and my mother's work, it's very saturated. And I never realized that my work, like the piece behind me, like I never even realized how saturated the color is in my work. It just comes
Yeah,
intuitively. It's just something that
yeah.
comes out of me. So I guess I would say it's just part of who I am. And
I
um,
wouldn't be surprised if you had, people. There's like three classifications of how people see color, like the number of rods and cones that they have, and so there's like if you show they have a test where they show color, and some people can, oh, I see 28 colors, or I see
yeah,
32. So,
yeah,
and so some people see almost twice as many colors as
yeah,
other people. So
yeah,
we got a whole color thing I can
yeah.
love to talk to you about. So I have time just my final question. Simple question, but I'd be curious to see what you say. What does making art do for you?
Making art is an affirmation of life. Um, I don't talk about it that much, but there was a period in my life for about 10 years where I was medically disabled. And what brought me out of it was doing art.
Mm.
And it's just like, the narrative around Frida Kahlo when she was bedridden, she was struggling. For me, finding my inner voice has been a way for me to process the world and survive. And it gives me joy. It makes me frustrated. But whatever it does, it's an affirmation of who I am. It's a process of just, finding my voice and finding a way to give back to the world too.
Hmm.
Like, I think that's why I became a teacher, because I want to make a difference and I want to communicate, and I want to show beauty and pain. And I think a lot of times spiritually we forget to show the dark underbelly of the world. We're just looking at what
Hmm.
is considered beautiful and nice,
Hmm.
but it's the whole spectrum of, what it is to be whole and healthy and human that me, um, that's what art making is about. Yeah.
You've said that you've only feel like you've only been making work for 10 years. So I'm really curious to see what the next 10 is going to bring, because you
Oh,
seem to have
thank
hit the ground running. I really want to catch forward with that. I can't thank you enough for coming by and talking to me today about your work. And I love it when an artist can tell me just a few things that completely changes the way I'm viewing their work. And you've done that today. So thank you
oh,
very much.
mm,
And thank everybody else who's tuned in to watch Heather and I's conversation today. We really appreciate your support. Of course, we love it when you like, share, and mostly subscribe. That really helps propel ArtShow forward. So thank you very much for tuning in. And again, Heather, thank you very much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it.
thank you so much for this opportunity. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Bye bye.